This episode of Fast Forward is brought to you by Lenovo, where different analyzes better. If you want to hear past episodes, you can find them on iTunes, Google Play, SoundCloud, and wherever fine podcasts are given away for free. Again, big thanks to Lenovo for making this show possible, and thank you for listening. Hi, I'm Dan Costa, editor-in-chief of PCMag.com, and welcome to Fast Forward, where we have an ongoing conversation about living in the future. This is one of our special South by Southwest editions. South by Southwest is a technology, a music, and a film festival here in Austin, Texas. It's also where you can meet some really incredible people and learn about the future. I'm doing that right now with Steve Case, the former CEO and founder of America Online. He is a successful investor. He also writes books. His most latest book is called The Third Wave, and we're going to talk about that third wave. Steve, thanks so much for taking time out and talking to me. I've seen you at South by Southwest in various settings. This is the first time we've spoken, but I've seen you at South by across a room like 10 times over the last couple of years. Why do you keep coming back to the show?
Well, I love the energy, I love the ideas, I love the creativity, I love the sense of possibility, and that's what's great about innovation entrepreneurship. People really believing they can change the world and believing they have an interesting new idea and you know, being able to bump into people and ideas in sometimes serendipitous kind of ways, you know, makes sense. And in addition, we have our own agenda, if you will. One of the things we're really focused on is promoting regional entrepreneurship, more inclusive entrepreneurship, a concept called Rise of the Rest. So we're also here to talk about that, maybe nudge some of those issues forward a little bit and maybe inspire some folks to do something about it.
It's amazing how many cities come to South by Southwest to find entrepreneurs, to learn other cities' playbooks, smaller cities, not like New York and LA, but smaller regional centers that are trying to create their own innovation centers. You don't see that in a lot of other shows.
Yeah, one of the things great about South by and people coming to Austin, they're coming from all over the country. Of course, some are coming from California, New York, and Massachusetts, but they're coming from all over the country. And it is an opportunity for people in these rise of the rest cities and cities around the country to be able to connect to people, and that's important. Building these networks, building these relationships are important. Partnerships will be increasingly important in this next wave. This is a place to build those partnerships. And also there's 23 mayors here. I met with a number of them yesterday, and they're trying to figure out how to create more of a startup culture in their cities. There's a recognition now that economic development historically was how do you get somebody to move their headquarters to your city, or how do you get a factory built in your city. The only sustainable way to create jobs and drive growth is to back the next generation startups, some of which will end up being the Fortune 500 companies of tomorrow. And I think the mayors and governors are starting to figure that out. And so it's great to see a couple dozen mayors here at South by trying to learn about things and figure out what they can do to create more of a culture around startups, create more investment incentives around startups, be more of a magnet for talent. And Austin itself has inspired a lot of them because 30 years ago it was not a particularly startup-oriented culture, wasn't a particularly tech-oriented culture, but because of the university here, the success of Dell, some smart decisions by the mayor and others, it now really is a magnet for capital and for talent. And so how do we do that in a couple dozen other cities that are in these rise of the rest regions?
I want to get to the role of government and those mayors being so important in third wave companies. But let's set the stage a little bit and talk about the three waves of really the internet,
right,
of the internet revolution. AOL really created and helped foster that first wave of innovation. So why don't you explain what those three waves are?
Well, the first wave really was just getting everybody online. When we got started, AOL was 1985, so what's that, 32 years ago? Only 3% of people were online, and they were only online 1 hour a week. So we said we wanted to get America online, get the world online. And, it was a daunting task, kind of quite a mountain to climb. It took us really a decade, but there were companies that were building the infrastructure, the networks, the servers, the software, the on-ramps, if you will, and then educating people about why they could get online and just figuring out ways to make it easier to use and more useful, more fun, also more affordable. We started with $10 an hour to be connected. Yeah. And so that was pretty intimidating. So all the things in the
I remember
first wave,
logging on, getting my email down, and then logging off.
Yeah, it was kind of like the meter always running on a taxi, so it created an anxiety, and parents weren't particularly eager to have their kids spend time on it. So we had to build networks that made the cost much lower. We had to create software that made the access much easier. And we also just had to educate other companies, media companies, others about digital content. When people first dialed in, there was nobody online to talk to and nothing to do. Mm-hmm. And you just have to build it. So that really was the first wave. At the beginning of that, the mid 80s, essentially nobody knew about or cared about the internet. by the end of the first wave, sort of the year 2000, kind of pretty much everybody was connected and they couldn't live without it. And even during that first wave, the one that's, when I talk to people, particularly at places like South by, that they find remarkable, particularly young people, is when we started in 1985, it was illegal for consumers or businesses to connect to the internet. At the time, it was restricted to government agencies and educational institutions. So if you're on a college campus, you could do it. If you worked at a government agency, you could do it. But if you're a consumer or a business, you couldn't do it. That didn't change until 1991 when the Congress passed the Telecom Act to commercialize access to the internet. So a lot of things had to happen in that first wave to take the idea of the internet and make it real.
And then we get to the second wave, which is these services and apps that layer on top of the basic internet.
Yeah, and that's really been the last 15 years or so. Because in that first wave, we built the infrastructure. You didn't need to do that so much anymore. So it really was building apps and services on top of the internet. And it shifted from the PC, which kind of was the epicenter of the first wave, to the smartphones that were the epicenter of the second wave. And obviously a lot of apps, Facebook or Twitter or Snapchat or Waze, you can kind of go down the list, emerge in that second wave. And the playbook there was generally a lean startup focused on the coding and building an app, launch it, keep iterating it, hope you get viral adoption, hope it really spreads, and then figure out some way to monetize it. But at the core, it was about software. At the core, it was about apps.
And it was also a relationship between the startup company and an audience. You'd get a certain number of consumers to sign up for your service, and you're pretty much done. You scale, and it's that direct relationship. In the third wave, there are new players involved.
Exactly. Now, the second wave, it was still a battle because it was a battle for attention. There were probably 1,000 photo apps launched, and Instagram, Snapchat, a few others emerged as sort of the winners, and it did have this kind of winner-take-all or winners-take-all dynamic. So it was easy to get started, easy to create an app, pretty hard to get broad-based adoption. But in the third wave, while software, of course, will continue to be important, it's going to be less important, and some of the other aspects like partnerships and policy will become more important. The third wave really is the next logical step, where you're kind of integrating the internet in seamless and pervasive, sometimes even invisible ways with the Internet of Things throughout our lives. And in the process, I think really can revolutionize, disrupt, change things like healthcare, education, transportation, energy, food, agriculture, government services, a lot of things that have changed a little bit in the first wave and the second wave, but it will change a lot more in the third wave. But the reason I wrote the book is I realized the playbook that worked in the first wave that was not that relevant in the second wave will become very relevant again in the third wave.
So let's talk about some of those differences, because there really are different inputs. And one of the things you say in the book is that innovation could actually get more difficult in this third wave, and that a lot of the entrepreneurship models, a lot of lean startup models may not work in this new age because of these new conditions. So what's going to be different?
There are obviously still opportunities to build sort of second wave companies, app companies, and a lot of people will focus on that. I've seen a lot here this week at South by. But if you're really tackling some of these aspects of our lives, like how we stay healthy, or how our kids learn, or how we move around, or how we think about kind of energy, or how we operate government, pretty fundamental things. It's not going to just be about the software. The partnerships with other players, including often incumbents in those sectors, are going to be important. If you really want to revolutionize healthcare, it's probably not so much an app you launch, it's probably figuring out how to partner with hospitals and work with doctors and connect with health plans and understand the policy framework, Obamacare or whatever comes next around healthcare. That's going to really revolutionize how we change our healthcare system. Similarly, if you want to revolutionize education, there are things you can do in the apps, things you can do in the cloud, but still a lot of learning is going to happen actually in classrooms. And so figuring out ways to work with teachers to create more personalized, adaptive approaches to learning, so sort of augmenting the learning process is going to be important. But that requires partnering with the teachers, partnering with the schools, partnering with the universities. So partnership is going to become much more important. It was in the first way. We had 300 partners at AOL. We wouldn't have been successful without all those partners. We couldn't have gone alone. We had to go together. That kind of dynamic is going to become more important in the third wave. And the other is policy. These are regulated sectors. Because they're such important aspects of our lives, their government does play a role. Entrepreneurs don't like to hear that. Government slows things down and regulations screw everything up, and obviously there's some aspect of that. But there's going to be some regulations around food safety or drug safety, or making sure that drones in the sky or driverless cars on the roads are done in a way that's safe for communities.
I think everybody wants some regulation of driverless cars.
Yeah, well, not everybody. There's some who want nothing, but that's not realistic. I think when you're dealing with issues like this, and they're not so much about an app to book a restaurant or share photos, but an app that, or a business, a software, a service that really has a more fundamental, kind of role in our communities. It's going to, there are going to be some, government involvement, some regulatory involvement. So that's a skill set that entrepreneurs in this third wave are going to need to learn. Sort of respect for that aspect of things and ways to engage and try to shape that policy in an important way. And the third P that was important in the first wave, not really important in the second wave, but will be important again, I think, in the third wave, is perseverance. These actually are hard problems. Revolutionizing healthcare is not going to happen overnight. It's going to require real kind of patience and perseverance. And with AOL in that first wave, we almost didn't make it. There were a few times that there was a real struggle. Finally, after 10 years, we broke through. So people used to joke that we're kind of like a 10-year in the making overnight sensation. That's going to be more common in the third wave. So partnerships were a big deal in the first wave. Policy was a big deal in the first wave. Perseverance was a big deal in the first wave. They weren't that big a deal in the second wave. You didn't really need partners to launch an app. You didn't really need to deal with policy, at least until you got really big, like Facebook, when it had lots of users. There were some privacy issues, but for the most part, they didn't really need it. And it was an overnight success, so perseverance wasn't needed. But in the third wave, I think the next generation of entrepreneurs are going to need to embrace those first wave principles.
And you see certain companies that are hitting these barriers right now. I think about Uber and I think about Airbnb. They're built as apps, they're built as services, but then when you actually run into the real world and you're managing the real world, you've got to deal with cities and towns and local ordinances, and that slows them down.
Yeah, it slows them down, and I know that's a source of frustration. Even here in Austin, both Uber and Lyft essentially are banned because they wouldn't agree to a certain provision. Like they're banned in some countries like Germany and South Korea. So it just shows you the importance of these policy kind of aspects of things. At the same time, they kind of got lucky because in their instance, the policy, the regulation was generally viewed as protecting the incumbent taxi industry, which people were not necessarily that supportive of. So they could kind of ignore the laws, or really flaunt the laws and just launch anyway. That's not going to work if you're trying to develop a new drug or a new medical device in healthcare. So these third wave, you're going to need to be kind of connected on the policy side to even the market, to even get customers, to even generate revenue. So that Uber playbook of kind of ignore the rules isn't going to work so well in the third wave.
So let's talk a little bit about Rise of the Rest. You've hit, I think, 26 cities in the last 2 years. Talking about entrepreneurship, looking at sort of the transformation of those cities. During that time, we've had this incredible economic growth in the country. Unemployment's down at 5%, and yet if you look at our national conversation, it's all about the income inequality gap and the need to find more good, high-paying jobs and create more of these jobs. Why is there, it seems like there's a disconnect between those two trends.
Well, there is a disconnect because they're kind of like two Americas. There's what's happening on the coast, particularly in California, New York, Massachusetts, where there's a lot of innovation, a lot of wealth creation, a lot of job creation, and the rest of the country. And, last year, if you look at the data, 78% of venture capital went to 3 states, California, New York, and Massachusetts. So since we're funding in Silicon Valley, as an example, these disruptive entrepreneurs who are in many cases creating technologies that destroy jobs in the middle of the country, but we're not investing in the entrepreneurs in the middle of the country that can create jobs in the middle of the country that can at least partially offset the jobs that are lost. So that's why we saw even in this election, there are a lot of people who do feel frustrated and left behind. They've not seen the benefits of digitization. They have not seen the benefits of globalization. So we need to understand that. We need to view that as whether you supported Trump or didn't, as a wake-up call. How do we make sure that we have a more inclusive approach to innovation and everybody everywhere feels like they have a shot at the American dream. We have to level the playing field. It's not just about place. I talked about that 78% going to 3 states. 90% went to men, only 10% to women. About 1% went to African Americans. So it does matter where you live, does matter what you look like, does matter what school you went to or who do you know, who's in your network. And while that's always going to be part of venture capital, part of innovation, it doesn't really kind of maximize the likelihood that we're going to get all the great ideas from all the great entrepreneurs from all the great places on the playing field. And as a result, some communities are going to struggle and feel left behind. And if we do that in a sustained way, I think the country itself could fall behind. We need to make sure we level the playing field so everybody everywhere has a shot, and we create job's everywhere, not just in a few places.
What do you think? And I also think there's the existential threat of automation. Right. Here at South by, we're building all these tools. There'll always be jobs for people that go to South by in various industries. But in a lot of ways, we're building tools that are putting other people out of work. Right. What is a good response to that? I mean, the basic one is like, we need to raise education levels for everybody. Right. And somehow that will enable new job creation. Is that
Well, I think there's certainly history to this. So some context that 200 years ago, over 90% of us worked on farms. Now it's less than 2%, largely because of automation. But 88% didn't suddenly become unemployed. We then created like the Industrial Revolution and then the technology revolution. So part of it is just creating that next new thing, that next revolution that creates a new set of jobs, many of which we can't even imagine today. But at the core, you're right, the pace of innovation in robotics and AI and driverless vehicles and things like that are going to destroy a bunch of jobs. We can't stop that. We shouldn't try to stop that, because if we tried to stop that, other countries, China, others would kind of lead in those areas. It's going to happen no matter what. The question is, do we how do we participate? And then how do we make sure we are investing in entrepreneurs in these other places, creating jobs in other sectors? Could be healthcare services, could be restaurants, could be a lot of different things. Manufacturing is coming back. We backed a company in Detroit called Chinola that taking on displaced auto workers, retraining them to build watches and leather bags and things like that. We need more of those kind of companies that are kind of rise to the rest, kind of focus. What the response that you sometimes hear is, well, this is inevitable, you can't do anything about it, we just need to come up with like a universal basic income or something, some kind of safety net. And I think that's a mistake, because jobs are not just about income, it's also about dignity and people feeling good about themselves. And we need to make sure we don't just focus on the income side, we also actually create jobs in more places for more people in the future. And that's only going to happen if we embrace this notion of the rise of the rest.
All right, let me ask you my closing questions I asked to all my guests. What technology trend is most concerning to you? What keeps you up at night?
I think, but maybe it's not a direct technology trend, it's exactly what we're talking about. The pace of innovation, how it accelerates, and how do we make sure it is inclusive, and the benefits of that, including jobs, including economic growth, are widespread. If we continue on the current path where we're essentially funding a few kinds of people in a few kinds of places, such as Silicon Valley, I think we'll miss an opportunity, and we'll end up in 10, 20 years being in a very difficult place as a country. So it's not the technology per se, it's the societal implications of the technology, and how do we make sure we are in fact leveling the playing field. I think that's a threat. If we don't do it right, it's an opportunity if we do it right.
Is there a trend that you see as particularly hopeful or optimistic that you're just really excited about? It's going to change the world?
I'd say two things, and it ties in with exactly what you were asking about. I do think this third wave is going to have a profound impact on our lives, because, kind of the things that it's going to be dealing with in terms of how our kids learn and how our parents stay, healthy, and how we move around and how we think about energy, and how governments reimagine how they can, offer services to the constituents are very important aspects of our lives. And you're seeing more focus, even here at South by, more focus from entrepreneurs tackling those problems. So this third wave, I think, is going to be very exciting and have significant impacts. And the second is, I really am optimistic that on this rise of the rest notion, that the rest really will rise, that people are beginning to wake up to the fact there are great entrepreneurs building great companies all over the country. And as more media attention focuses on those cities and those entrepreneurs, and more investor attention, venture investors get on planes to visit companies, not just cars to drive to companies. I think you'll see a more inclusive form of entrepreneurship, a more impactful innovation economy, and so I'm optimistic about that.
Is there a product or a service or a gadget that you use every day that you're just like, wow, this is an amazing device and it changed my life?
Well, for me, since I was involved in those early days, even coming to South by, which is all about the internet, really is exciting, because I'd go to conferences 30 years ago where there's 400 people in the room and I'd be the only one talking about the internet. People were talking about hardware or software or semiconductors. So the fact that the internet really is playing such a fundamental role is gratifying. Obviously, the device that all of us are, or most part, are now phones and iPads, the ability to get access to so much information and so many people all over the world is exciting. So it's great to see the strides we made in the first wave and the second wave, and I'm looking forward to seeing the impacts of the third wave.
So how can people find you online and get in touch with you? I imagine you still have an AOL.
I do have an AOL account, of course. I also have a Revolution account, but the easiest way is on Twitter, Steve Case. And also we have the casefoundation.org website, and revolution.com for our investing company, and also a site focused on this Rise of the Rest called riseofrest.com.
Very cool. We'll include all that in the notes. Steve, thanks so much for coming by.
Thank you. Great to be with you.
All right, that's Fast Forward for today. Thanks for joining us. If you want to see back episodes of this show, you can find them on PCMag.com. If you want to listen to a podcast version, you can find it in all the places that fine podcasts are given away for free. Thanks so much for joining us. I'll see you in the future. This episode of Fast Forward is brought to you by Lenovo, where different analyzes better. If you want to hear past episodes, you can find them on iTunes, Google Play, SoundCloud, and wherever fine podcasts are given away for free. Again, big thanks to Lenovo for making this show possible, and thank you for listening.